High above the dusty plains of central Anatolia, the wind carries a particular kind of silence, a weight that seems to press down from the vast open sky of modern-day Turkey. It is a landscape defined by its bones, jagged peaks of volcanic tuff, soft and porous, rising like frozen waves from a sea of pale earth. For thousands of years, the people here lived upon the surface, tending to their vines and their livestock, unaware that beneath their feet lay a mirror world, a silent kingdom carved into the very foundation of the earth. We often think of history as something that builds upward, reaching toward the clouds in the form of cathedrals and skyscrapers, but in this corner of the world, the most profound achievements of our ancestors were born of a descent into the dark. The story of Derinkuyu does not begin with a grand archaeological expedition or the discovery of an ancient map, but rather with the rhythmic, mundane sound of a hammer hitting a stone wall in 1963. A local man was renovating his home, perhaps hoping to expand a storage area or simply repair the wear of time, when one of his blows struck a hollow note. Behind a wall in his basement, he found a cavity, a small dark opening that seemed to swallow the light of his lantern. When he pushed through the rubble, he did not find a simple cellar or a forgotten well. Instead, he found a stone stairway, leading down, step by step, into a labyrinth that had not felt the warmth of a human breath for centuries. Imagine the transition from the familiar comforts of a home to the cool, damp air of a passage carved with impossible precision. As he descended, the narrow corridor opened into rooms, and those rooms led to further tunnels, branching out like the veins of a titan. It was not a cave, but a city, a masterwork of engineering that defied every logic of the time. There were ventilation shafts reaching hundreds of feet into the deep, wells that tapped into subterranean rivers, and massive circular stone doors weighing 1/2 ton, designed to be rolled shut from the inside with a single push. It was a place built for a singular, haunting purpose: to disappear. As you settle into your blankets tonight, perhaps finding that perfect pocket of warmth and stillness, you are joining a long tradition of those seeking sanctuary. Here at the Slumber Archives, we believe there is a unique peace to be found in the echoes of the past, and we share new history narrations just like this one every single day. If you find these journeys into deep time help you drift off, please consider subscribing so you can join us for every new discovery. A gentle like on the video also helps others find their way to our quiet corner of the internet. But for now, let us return to the darkness beneath the Anatolian soil, where the air grows thin and the shadows grow long. The scale of what was found behind that basement wall is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. Archaeologists eventually realized that Derinkuyu was not a singular event, but a vertical metropolis capable of housing as many as 20,000 people. It descends 18 levels into the earth, reaching a depth of over 250 feet. This was not a temporary hideout or a crude bunker. It was a fully realized society. There were stalls for livestock, communal dining halls, oil presses for light and heat, and even small chapels with vaulted ceilings, all hewn from the living rock. The engineering required to create such a space is staggering, especially when one considers the era of its possible inception. While the most visible layers show signs of use by the Phrygians and later by Byzantine Christians fleeing persecution, the deeper one goes, the more the timeline begins to blur. Some researchers look to the Hittites of the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, while others point toward even older origins, perhaps stretching back to the end of the last ice age, a period known as the Younger Dryas. This was a time of cataclysmic climate shifts, roughly 12,800 years ago, when the world was gripped by a sudden, brutal cooling. In such a world, the surface would have become a place of terror, lashed by storms or scorched by solar flares. The stratigraphy, that is, the study of the layers of earth and human occupation, suggests that these tunnels may have been a response to a threat we can no longer name. When we speak of deep time, we are speaking of the vast gulfs of history that have been erased by the shifting of tectonic plates and the erosion of memory. Derinkuyu stands as a silent witness to a chapter of the human story that was nearly lost forever. The initial impressions of the explorers who first mapped these depths were marked by a sense of profound unease. The city is silent now, but it is a crowded silence. You can almost hear the low murmur of thousands of voices echoing through the ventilation ducts, the soft lowing of cattle in the dark, and the scrape of those massive stone doors as they were sealed against an unknown enemy. The precision of the work is what haunts the mind. The way the air remains fresh even at the lowest levels, thanks to a sophisticated network of over 50 shafts that draw oxygen from the surface. It is a testament to a level of geological understanding that mainstream science struggles to place within the primitive context of the ancient world. There is a strange comfort in the thought of this hidden world, a place where time stands still. While empires rose and fell on the surface, while wars were fought and languages were forgotten, these tunnels remained, cool, dark, and indifferent to the passage of centuries. As we continue our descent into the history of this place, we must ask ourselves not just how it was built, but why. What could drive an entire civilization to abandon the sun and the stars for a life in the shadows? Was it a fear of invaders, or a fear of the heavens themselves? The deeper we go, the more the walls seem to whisper of a lost age, a time when the boundary between the earth and the sky was a matter of life and death. The stone here is soft, yes, but it requires a steady hand and a patient mind to carve a cathedral out of a mountain. As you breathe in the stillness of your own room, imagine the cool, still air of the 18th level, where the weight of the world sits heavy above you, and the only sound is the slow, rhythmic drip of water from a distant stalactite, a clock that marks the passing of millennia in the dark. We are only at the threshold of this mystery. The basement wall in 1963 was merely the first veil to be lifted. Beyond it lies a network of hundreds of other underground cities, some connected by tunnels miles long, forming a hidden map of Anatolia that we are only just beginning to trace. It is a reminder that what we see on the surface is often only a fraction of the truth, and that the most enduring legacies of our species are often the ones we buried to keep them safe. As the night deepens, let your mind wander through those corridors of stone. Let the questions of who, when, and why drift away, replaced by the simple, heavy reality of the rock. The earth has a long memory, and in the silence of Derinkuyu, that memory is almost tangible. A heartbeat felt through the soles of your feet, a breath exhaled from the deep. We are travelers in a landscape of ghosts, walking through a city built by hands that were not so different from our own, driven by the same quiet desire for safety, for community, and for a place to rest. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, one must first understand the stone itself, a substance known as volcanic tuff. Thousands of years ago, the nearby volcanoes of Mount Erciyes and Mount Hassan blanketed this region in a thick, cooling embrace of ash and debris. Over the eons, this material compressed into a rock that is paradoxically both durable and remarkably forgiving. It is a stone that yields to the iron chisel with a soft, rhythmic crunch, yet hardens upon exposure to the air, creating walls that have stood firm for millennia without the need for mortar or timber. As we descend further into the earth, the air grows cool and still, carrying the faint, earthy scent of ancient minerals and the weight of the mountain above us. The walls here are smooth, marked only by the faint, diagonal scars of the tools that shaped them, a silent testament to a labor that must have spanned generations. It is as if the people who lived here did not merely build a city, but rather they dreamed it into the stone, carving their lives directly into the bones of the earth. The descent is not a simple drop, but a gradual, spiraling journey into a vertical labyrinth that reaches a staggering depth of 200 feet. Imagine, if you will, the sheer audacity of such a project. There are 18 distinct levels currently known to us, though some archaeologists whisper that there may be more, still hidden beneath the silt and the shadows of the lower reaches. Each level is a world unto itself, connected by narrow, sloping corridors and stairways that seem to vanish into the dark. We are moving through a space that defies our modern understanding of architecture, where the ceiling of one room is the floor of another, and the very concept of a horizon is replaced by the steady, downward pull of gravity. The sheer volume of earth removed to create this space is estimated to be hundreds of thousands of tons, a monumental displacement that leaves no trace on the surface, as if the ground had simply swallowed a civilization whole. As we reach the lower levels, a strange sensation begins to take hold, a feeling of lightness that contradicts the depth of our position. This is the result of a masterwork of ancient engineering that remains one of the most baffling features of the city. Running like a central spine through the heart of the complex is a massive ventilation shaft, a vertical chimney that drops 550 feet from the surface down to the water table below. It is a feat of precision that seems impossible for a culture without modern surveying equipment. This shaft, along with dozens of smaller flues scattered throughout the city, allowed fresh air to circulate freely, even in the deepest chambers. Even now, if you stand at the base of one of these vents, you can feel a gentle phantom breeze against your skin, a cool draught that has been flowing through these halls since the dawn of history. The ingenuity of this system extends beyond mere survival. The shafts were designed to provide air to the living quarters, the communal kitchens, and the stables, ensuring that the thousands of people sheltered here could breathe easily, even when the massive stone doors were sealed against the world above. It is a design that implies a deep, intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics and thermodynamics, long before these concepts were given names by modern science. The air moves in a slow, rhythmic cycle, drawing the warmth of the earth and the freshness of the sky into a singular, life-sustaining pulse. One cannot help but wonder how many years of observation and trial were required to perfect such a system, or what forgotten school of knowledge guided the hands of the architects who mapped these invisible currents of wind. Beyond the ventilation, the city reveals a sophisticated grasp of hydrology. The main shafts did not just carry air, they served as wells, reaching down into the subterranean aquifers to provide a constant supply of clean, cold water. This ensured that the inhabitants were never at the mercy of those who held the surface, for their lifeblood was drawn from the very depths they inhabited. The water was reached through buckets lowered down the shafts, a process that would have been a daily ritual, the sound of splashing water echoing up through the stone like a soft, rhythmic heartbeat. There is a profound sense of self-sufficiency here, a realization that this was not a temporary refuge, but a fully realized society capable of enduring for months or perhaps even years in total isolation from the sun. As we trace the outlines of the chambers, we see how the soft tuff was utilized to create every necessity of life. There are niches carved into the walls to hold oil lamps, their soot still staining the stone in dark, smudged halos. There are hollowed-out depressions for storage jars and long, flat surfaces that served as tables or beds. The architecture is organic, following the natural contours of the rock while adhering to a strict functional logic. It is a subterranean urbanism where every inch of space was considered and utilized, The transition from one level to the next is often marked by a change in the texture of the stone or the width of the passage, suggesting that different sections of the city may have been constructed at different times, layered upon one another like the rings of an ancient tree. The mystery of the excavation process itself remains a subject of quiet debate. How did they light their way in the suffocating darkness of the deep earth without consuming all the oxygen with their torches? How did they maintain their sense of direction, carving straight lines and perfect circles in a world without landmarks? The precision of the ventilation shafts suggests a level of mathematical sophistication that challenges our assumptions about the primitive cultures of the past. We are looking at a masterclass in stratigraphy, the study of rock layers, applied not for academic curiosity, but for the very survival of a people. They knew exactly where the stone was strongest, where the water flowed, and where the air would naturally rise. Walking through these 18 levels, one feels the presence of the 10,000 souls who once called this abyss their home. The sheer scale of the endeavor is humbling. It is not just the depth of 200 feet, but the breadth of the vision required to conceive of such a place. It is a city of shadows and silence, yet it feels intensely alive, as if the walls themselves are exhaling the stories of those who carved them. The soft volcanic tuff has preserved every detail, every tool mark, and every intentional curve, holding them in a stasis that defies the passage of centuries. We are moving through a monument to human persistence, a place where the abyss was not something to be feared, but a sanctuary to be embraced, shaped by hand and heart into a masterpiece of hidden history. Imagine for a moment the weight of the earth above you, not as a crushing burden, but as a thick, protective blanket. As we descend further into these subterranean corridors, the silence deepens, becoming a physical presence that wraps around the senses. It is here, in the cool, still air of the residential quarters, that the true scale of this achievement begins to reveal itself. We are not merely looking at a series of caves or temporary bunkers, but at a meticulously planned urban landscape that once pulsed with the quiet rhythm of 10,000, perhaps even 20,000, human lives. Archaeologists, as they pace out these labyrinthine levels, find themselves mapping a world that mirrors the surface in its complexity, yet exists in a state of eternal twilight. The residential zones are not scattered haphazardly. They are organized into distinct districts, connected by a web of arterial tunnels that functioned much like the streets of a bustling metropolis. There are communal living spaces where families would gather, their private rooms branching off from central courtyards carved directly into the stone. In these chambers, the walls are smoothed by the passage of countless hands, and the floors are worn into gentle depressions where people sat, ate, and slept for months at a time. The sheer density of these living quarters suggests a society that had mastered the art of close quarters existence, turning a potential claustrophobia into a profound sense of communal security. As the years passed and the city expanded, the architects of this hidden world demonstrated an uncanny understanding of spatial management. They carved out niches for lamps, small depressions for storage, and intricate shelving units that remain as functional today as they were thousands of years ago. It is a strange sensation to stand in a room designed for a family that vanished into the mists of deep time, realizing that the dimensions of their lives were dictated by the soft, yielding nature of the volcanic tuff. Every corner, every archway, speaks to a collective effort to maintain a sense of normalcy in an environment that was anything but normal. One cannot help but wonder about the psychological toll of such a life, tucked away in the belly of the world where the rising sun is merely a memory. The human mind is inextricably linked to the cycles of the natural world, to the shifting colors of the sky and the movement of the wind through the trees, To step into this city was to step out of time itself. Without the visual cues of day and night, the residents would have had to rely on the internal ticking of their own biological clocks and the steady, flickering glow of linseed oil lamps. The shadows here are long and heavy, and the air carries a faint, earthy scent that never truly dissipates. Living without natural sunlight for extended periods creates a unique mental landscape. The eyes adjust, the pupils dilating to catch every stray glimmer of light, and the ears become attuned to the smallest vibrations echoing through the rock. There is a specific kind of quietude that settles over a subterranean population, a hushed way of speaking, a careful way of moving, as if the mountain itself is listening. Scholars suggest that the communal nature of the living spaces was not just a matter of necessity, but a vital psychological anchor. In the absence of the sun, the warmth of one's neighbour became the primary source of light. The shared meals in the great halls, the rhythmic sound of communal grinding stones, and the voices of children echoing through the ventilation shafts would have been the threads that held the fabric of their sanity together. Yet despite the lack of horizons, there is no evidence of despair in these stones. Instead, there is an overwhelming sense of order. The mapping of these quarters reveals a sophisticated understanding of privacy and social hierarchy. Even in the depths, there were grander chambers for those of status and smaller, more utilitarian spaces for workers. The communal kitchens are vast, with massive circular stones used for grinding grain and deep pits for the storage of oil and wine. It is as if the people who lived here were determined to recreate the richness of their surface lives in every detail, refusing to let the darkness diminish their humanity. We must consider the sheer endurance required to maintain such a population. 10,000 people breathing, cooking and living in a space with no windows requires a mastery of engineering that seems almost impossible for the era. The ventilation shafts, some reaching depths of over 250 feet, acted as the city's lungs, drawing in fresh air and exhaling the heat and smoke of thousands of lamps. Standing at the base of one of these shafts and looking up, one can see a tiny distant square of blue sky, a reminder of the world they left behind. That small patch of light must have been a sacred site, a connection to the infinite heavens, while they remained anchored in the deep, silent stone. The residential quarters also reveal a fascinating aspect of their daily survival, the way they managed their waste and water. There are intricate channels carved into the floors to direct water to central cisterns and specialized chambers located far from the living areas that served as communal latrines. This level of sanitation is a testament to a highly organized society that understood the risks of disease in confined spaces. They were not merely surviving, they were thriving in a way that challenges our modern perceptions of what a primitive civilization could achieve. As we wander deeper into the residential zones, the transition between private and public life becomes blurred. A doorway leads from a small family bedroom directly into a massive hall that might have served as a school or a place of gathering. The walls here are sometimes blackened by the soot of ancient fires, a haunting residue of the warmth that once filled these spaces. It is easy to imagine the low murmur of voices, the scent of baking bread rising through the shafts, and the soft shuffling of feet on the stone floors. The city was a living organism, a hive of activity that functioned with a precision that we are only beginning to map. The question of how long these periods of subterranean living lasted remains one of the great mysteries of the site. Were these people permanent residents of the shadows, or were they seeking refuge from a world that had become too dangerous to inhabit? The archaeological record is silent on this point, offering only the physical evidence of their presence. Some believe the city was a permanent home for a specialized caste of people, while others argue it was a grand sanctuary used during times of great upheaval, perhaps during the shifting climates of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden, intense cooling that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. If they were indeed fleeing a changing world, the psychological impact would have been even more profound. The transition from the wide-open plains to the narrow, winding tunnels of the earth would have been a collective trauma, mitigated only by the safety the stone provided. They traded the beauty of the landscape for the security of the abyss. In doing so, they created a culture that was inward-looking, focused on the strength of the community and the preservation of their heritage. The residential quarters are a map of that focus, a physical manifestation of the human will to endure, no matter how deep the darkness may be. As we move away from the living spaces and toward the deeper, more enigmatic levels of the city, the atmosphere shifts again. The tunnels become narrower, the ceilings lower, and the purpose of the rooms less clear. We are leaving the familiar comforts of the hearth and the home and entering the functional heart of the machine. Here, the engineering takes center stage, revealing the hidden mechanisms that allowed 10,000 people to breathe, eat, and remain hidden from the eyes of the world above. The deeper we go, the more we realize that this city was not just a place to live. It was a masterpiece of survival, carved from the very bones of the earth. As we descend further into the cooling damp of the stone, the soft luminescence of our lamps catches on something unexpected. A massive, circular disc of rock, nearly 5 feet in diameter, resting in a deep groove carved into the corridor wall. This is a millstone door, a piece of engineering so precise and so heavy that it seems to defy the simple tools of the ancient world. It weighs nearly 1/2 ton, yet it is balanced with such delicacy that a single person, pushing from the inside, could roll it across the passage in a matter of seconds. Once it is seated in its socket, the door becomes an immovable part of the mountain itself. There are no handles on the outside, no gaps for a lever to find purchase, and no way for an invader to pull it back. The only feature on its smooth, convex face is a small central hole, a curious aperture that served as both a peephole to identify those standing in the dark and a port through which a spear could be thrust to discourage anyone attempting to breach the seal. These stones are the silent sentinels of the deep, placed at strategic intervals to compartmentalize the city, ensuring that even if one level were compromised, the thousands living below remained safe behind an unbreakable barrier of volcanic tuff. The layout of these corridors is not accidental. It is a labyrinth by design, a psychological weapon crafted from the void. As we walk, the passages begin to twist and turn in ways that feel intentionally disorienting. The ceilings dip low, forcing a tall man to stoop, making him vulnerable and slow, while the stairs often turn at sharp right angles to prevent a charging force from gaining any momentum. To the uninitiated, the city is a trap, a maze of dead ends and false floors where the very air seems to press in with the weight of 1,000 years. But for the inhabitants, this was a masterpiece of tactical spatial awareness. They understood that in the silence of the earth, information was just as vital as stone. If you look closely at the corners of the ceilings, you will find small circular shafts, vertical tubes barely a few inches wide that pierce through the bedrock to the levels above and below. These were the internal communication holes, the primitive nerves of the city. Through these narrow vents, messages could be whispered from the 10th floor to the 3rd in a matter of moments. A warning of an approaching shadow, a request for more oil, or the simple comfort of a human voice could travel through the stone, bypassing the heavy doors and the winding stairs. It allowed a population of 10,000 to move as a single, coordinated organism, even while completely cut off from the light of the sun. There is a profound sense of intentionality in every curve of these walls, a testament to a people who did not just inhabit the earth, but spoke its language. The builders utilized a concept known as stratigraphy, the study of rock layers. Though they likely called it by a much older name, they knew exactly which layers of the soft volcanic ash were stable enough to support vast, vaulted ceilings and which were too brittle to touch. This knowledge allowed them to create a vertical society where the functions of life were stacked like the pages of a forgotten book. Even the air we breathe down here, hundreds of feet below the surface, feels remarkably fresh. This is due to the central ventilation shafts, some reaching over 250 feet into the sky, acting as the lungs of the city. These shafts were so well designed that they provided a constant flow of air to every single room, while simultaneously serving as wells that tapped into the subterranean water table. It is a dual-purpose architecture that suggests a level of planning we often fail to attribute to the distant past. We find ourselves wondering how long it took to conceive such a place, whether it was carved in a single generation of feverish labor, or if it grew slowly, like a coral reef, over centuries of quiet expansion. The mystery of the city's age remains one of the most haunting questions in the study of human history. While mainstream archaeology often points to the 7th or 8th centuries before the Common Era, there are whispers of a much deeper antiquity. Some researchers point to the weathering patterns on the upper entrances or the sheer scale of the excavation as evidence of a much older origin, perhaps stretching back to the end of the last ice age, a period known as the Younger Dryas. This was a time of cataclysmic climate shifts when the world above became a place of fire and ice, and the only safety to be found was in the steady, unchanging temperature of the deep earth. If this city was indeed a refuge from a global catastrophe, it changes everything we think we know about the capabilities of our ancestors. It suggests a civilization that possessed not just the physical strength to move millions of tons of rock, but the mathematical and engineering foresight to create a permanent, self-sustaining biosphere. As we run our hands over the tool marks left in the stone, thousands upon thousands of tiny rhythmic strikes, we are touching the echoes of a labor that has no name. As the hours pass in the cool darkness, the silence of the city begins to take on a texture of its own. It is not the empty silence of a tomb, but the heavy, expectant silence of a place that is merely waiting. The strategic layout ensures that even the sound of our footsteps is muffled, swallowed by the porous stone before it can travel more than a few dozen yards. This acoustic dampening was another layer of defense, a way to move 10,000 people in near total stealth. Imagine the discipline required to raise children, to prepare meals, and to maintain the daily rhythms of life in a place where a loud shout could reveal your position to a lurking enemy. The inhabitants lived in a state of constant, quiet vigilance, their lives governed by the cold reality of the stone. They were a people who had traded the horizon for the safety of the hollow, and in doing so, they created a world that exists outside of time. Meanwhile, the deeper we venture, the more we see how the city was partitioned to confuse the senses of any intruder who managed to move past the great stone doors. The corridors often split into 3 or 4 identical paths, only one of which leads further into the mountain. The others might lead to a sudden drop into a darkened pit, or a narrow crawl space that terminates in a solid wall. It is a defensive architecture that relies on the psychology of fear and the disorientation of the dark. An invader, carrying only a flickering torch, would find themselves lost within minutes, trapped in a cold, grey world where every shadow looks like a doorway, and every doorway leads to nowhere. It is a sobering thought to realize that we are walking through a fortress that was never conquered. The city was eventually abandoned, not by force, but by the slow turning of the ages, as the threats of the surface faded and the call of the sun became too strong to ignore. And so, we continue our descent, leaving the strategic bottlenecks and the heavy millstone doors behind us. We are moving into the lower tiers now, where the air grows slightly cooler and the echoes of the world above finally vanish altogether. Here, the engineering becomes even more specialized, focusing not just on defense, but on the long-term preservation of life. We find the granaries, the wine presses, and the deep cisterns that once held enough water to sustain a nation for months of isolation. The stone here feels different, denser, older, as if the mountain itself is pressing closer to tell us its secrets. We are no longer just visitors in an ancient ruin. We are witnesses to a triumph of the human spirit over the elements, a testament to the lengths our ancestors would go to ensure that their stories and their lives would not be extinguished by the passage of time. The deeper we go, the more the modern world feels like a fleeting dream, and the stone city feels like the only reality that has ever truly mattered. The darkness ahead is vast, but the path is clear, carved by hands that knew the value of a solid foundation in an uncertain world. The air here carries a strange, lingering sweetness, a scent that feels out of place so far beneath the surface of the earth. It is the ghost of a harvest gathered thousands of years ago, a faint olfactory memory of grapes pressed and grain stored in the cool, silent dark. As we move deeper into the heart of the city, we find ourselves standing in a chamber that defies our understanding of ancient survival. Here, carved directly into the living volcanic tuff, are massive circular basins and deep channels that once flowed with the lifeblood of the community. These are not mere storage pits, but sophisticated wine and oil presses, masterfully engineered to function in a world without sunlight. Imagine the scene as it once was, the rhythmic sound of heavy stone rollers grinding against the rock, the splashing of dark juices into collection vats, and the low hum of voices echoing off the curved ceilings. It is a startling realization that these people did not merely hide here in fear. They lived, they fermented, they created. To produce wine and olive oil on such a scale suggests a level of permanence and cultural sophistication that challenges the traditional view of these tunnels as temporary shelters. One must wonder why a civilization would go to such immense lengths to carve heavy industrial machinery into the very foundation of the earth unless they intended for the underground to be their primary domain for generations. The stone itself seems to have absorbed the labor of those nameless craftsmen. The surfaces of the presses are worn smooth, polished by centuries of use, a tactile record of a people who understood that to endure the darkness, one must also cultivate the joys of the light. The wine produced here was likely not just for sustenance, but for ritual, for medicine, and for the simple human need to find comfort when the world above was consumed by chaos. Adjacent to these pressing rooms lie the great granaries, vast, bulbous voids hollowed out of the rock with surgical precision. These storage cellars were designed for the long term, capable of holding enough dry goods to feed 10,000 people through a siege that might last for years. In the stillness, you can almost feel the weight of the grain that once filled these spaces, tons of wheat and barley, kept cool and dry by the natural insulating properties of the stone. The sheer volume of these reserves speaks to a profound anxiety about the future, a collective memory of lean years, or perhaps a calculated preparation for a cataclysm that we can only guess at. Archaeologists look at these spaces and speak of stratigraphy, the study of rock layers to determine the passage of time, yet the stone here is frustratingly silent. Because these rooms were carved out of existing rock rather than built up from the ground, traditional dating methods often falter. We are left to look at the tool marks, the way the chisels bit into the soft stone, and wonder if these stores were filled during the Bronze Age or perhaps much earlier, during the mysterious period known as the Younger Dryas, a time of sudden, cooling temperatures and global upheaval some 12,000 years ago. As we wander further into the labyrinth, the sound of our own breathing becomes the only rhythm in the silence, until we encounter the most vital element of all, the water. Life in the deep requires more than just bread and wine. It requires a constant, reliable source of hydration that is protected from the world above. The engineers of this city understood this with a terrifying clarity. They constructed a complex hydraulic system, a network of vertical shafts that drop hundreds of feet into the natural aquifers deep within the earth. These wells were the city's most guarded secret and its greatest vulnerability. Looking down into one of these dark openings, the bottom lost in an infinite shadow, one realizes the strategic genius of their design. The shafts were purposely disconnected from the surface. They did not open to the world above, where an enemy might find them. This was a deliberate defense against the most common tactic of ancient warfare, the poisoning of the wells. By ensuring that their water source was accessible only from within the deepest levels of the city, the inhabitants created a closed loop of survival. They could retreat, seal the massive stone doors behind them, and exist in a self-sustained bubble, immune to the biological terrors that a besieging army might cast down from the hills. And yet, this reliance on deep water carried its own quiet risks. To live underground is to be at the mercy of the earth's own chemistry. One must imagine the elders of the city testing the water, watching for the subtle changes in mineral content, or the slow creep of stagnant air that might signal a failure in their lifeline. The maintenance of these shafts, the clearing of silt and the protection of the purity of the deep springs would have been a sacred duty, a task passed down from father to son in the flickering light of oil lamps. The complexity of the plumbing, the way the water was channeled through terracotta pipes and stone troughs to reach the various levels, suggests a mastery of fluid dynamics that seems ahead of its time. It forces us to reconsider the narrative of human progress as a straight, ascending line. Perhaps, in the deep past, there were peaks of knowledge that were later lost, pockets of brilliance that flourished in the dark and then vanished, leaving only these silent stone monuments as evidence of what they once knew. As we stand beside a silent well, the cool dampness of the air pressing against our skin, the mystery only deepens. How did they know exactly where to dig? How did they manage the ventilation for the workers laboring at such extreme depths, where the air grows thin and heavy? The more we uncover about the sustenance of this city, the more we realize that it was not a place of desperate hiding, but a masterpiece of urban planning. It was a city built in reverse, a mirror image of the world above, where the sky was replaced by a ceiling of stone and the sun was replaced by the steady, unwavering resolve of 10,000 souls. The grain is gone now, the wine presses are dry, and the water in the deep shaft sits undisturbed, reflecting nothing but the darkness. But the infrastructure remains, a skeleton of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. It whispers to us of a time when the earth was both a fortress and a provider, and when the boundary between the living and the stone was as thin as a shadow. We move forward, guided by the echoes of those who once called this abyss their home, knowing that every step takes us further from the familiar and closer to a truth that has been buried for millennia. The path narrows now, the walls closing in as the ceiling dips lower, forcing a slow, rhythmic pace that mimics the heartbeat of the mountain itself. In this transition between the great halls of industry and the more private quarters of the city, one can almost feel the presence of the thousands who once moved through these arteries. They were a people who lived in a constant state of preparation, their lives dictated by the cycles of the earth rather than the seasons of the sun. Even the way they stored their oil, in deep, cool niches carved into the walls, shows an intimate understanding of temperature and preservation. There is a profound patience in this architecture. To carve a single storage vat might take a man weeks of steady labor. To carve a city that could sustain a population larger than many medieval capitals would take centuries of collective effort. This was not the work of a single generation driven by a sudden crisis. This was a legacy, A grand design passed through time like a precious heirloom. As we continue our descent, we must ask ourselves what kind of world existed above that made this monumental effort not just a choice, but a necessity. The evidence is etched into the very grain of the rock, waiting for those with the patience to listen to the silence of the deep. The air changes as we venture further into the earth, growing cooler and more still, carrying a faint scent of dry stone and the ancient dust of forgotten ages. It is here, in the deeper reaches of the city, that the silence takes on a different quality, a quality of reverence. We find ourselves standing before a doorway carved with meticulous care, leading into a space that defies the utilitarian nature of the tunnels above. This is a cruciform church, a sanctuary shaped like a cross, hewn directly from the volcanic tuff with a precision that suggests the stonemasons were guided by more than just a need for shelter. They were guided by a vision of the divine. The ceiling arches gracefully overhead, mimicking the grand cathedrals of the surface world. Yet here, the weight of the entire mountain rests upon the shoulders of the faithful. There are no stained glass windows to catch the morning light, no bells to ring out across the valley, and yet one can almost hear the echoes of chanting voices vibrating through the very marrow of the rock. In these lower levels, the structured nature of this subterranean society becomes undeniably clear. This was not a chaotic refuge for the desperate, but a meticulously organized community where faith served as the cornerstone of their existence. We find small chapels tucked away in quiet corners, their walls smoothed by centuries of passing shoulders, and larger halls that served as religious schools. In these chambers, stone benches line the walls where students once sat, perhaps memorizing sacred texts by the flickering light of linseed oil lamps. There are baptismal fonts, deeply recessed into the floor, where the water would have been cool and still, a symbolic passage into a life of shared belief and shared survival. These spaces tell us that even in the dark, even in the crushing depth of the earth, these people were committed to the continuity of their culture and the preservation of their spirit. Faith, in this context, was far more than a set of rituals. It was a unifying force that bound 10,000 souls into a single breathing entity. During times of persecution, when the world above was a place of fire and sword, the underground city became a fortress of the soul. As the years passed, the inhabitants would have spent months at a time in these depths, never seeing the sun, their internal clocks governed only by the rhythm of prayer and the steady drip of water in the cisterns. One wonders about the psychological toll of such an existence, and yet the architecture suggests a profound sense of peace. The cruciform churches were not built in haste. They were carved with a patience that spans generations, a testament to a belief system that viewed time not in years, but in eternities. The presence of these sacred spaces invites us to reconsider the timeline of the city's construction. While mainstream archaeology often points to the Byzantine era for the decoration and expansion of these churches, the core structures may whisper of an even older origin. We must look at the stratigraphy, the study of the layers of earth and rock deposited over time, to understand the sequence of life here. If these churches were carved into existing chambers, what were those chambers originally used for? And if the cruciform shape was a later addition, what sacred geometry did the original builders follow? The stone does not give up its secrets easily. Radiocarbon dating, a method that measures the decay of carbon isotopes to determine the age of organic materials, can only tell us when a piece of wood was burned or a bone was left behind. It cannot date the act of carving the stone itself. We are left to wonder if the faith we see etched into the walls is the first faith to have called this place home, or merely the latest in a long succession of beliefs that sought refuge in the deep. As we linger in the shadows of a small chapel, the flickering light of our torches reveals faint traces of pigment on the walls, the ghosts of frescoes that once depicted saints and martyrs. These images would have been the only color in a world of grey and brown, vibrant reminders of a world beyond the stone. The act of painting these figures, of bringing color into the darkness, was an act of defiance against the gloom. It suggests a people who refused to let their environment diminish their humanity. Meanwhile, the sheer number of these religious spaces scattered throughout the city indicates that spiritual life was not centralized, but woven into the very fabric of daily existence. Every neighborhood had its altar, every tunnel its place of reflection. The silence here is heavy, weighted with the prayers of thousands who once stood where we stand. They would have gathered in these cruciform halls to find strength in each other's presence, their voices rising in unison to fill the vaulted ceilings. In the absence of the sky, they looked toward the stone for stability, and in the absence of the sun, they looked toward their faith for light. This was a structured society, yes, but it was a society held together by an invisible thread of shared conviction. The baptismal fonts were not just stone basins. They were the threshold of a community that defined itself by its endurance. As we move deeper, the questions only multiply. Why go to such lengths to recreate the architecture of the surface? Why carve pillars that support nothing but the memory of the world above? Perhaps it was a way to maintain a sense of normalcy, to convince themselves that they were not merely hiding in a cave, but living in a city of the mind. The effort required to remove thousands of tons of rock just to create a decorative archway speaks to a priority that transcends simple survival. It speaks to a need for beauty, for order, and for a connection to something greater than the self. The evidence is etched into the very grain of the rock, waiting for those with the patience to listen to the silence of the deep, a silence that is not empty, but full of the whispered hopes of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. The transition from the living quarters to these sacred zones is often marked by a narrowing of the tunnels, a physical reminder to those who entered that they were moving into a different kind of space. In these transitions, one feels the weight of deep time, the vast, almost incomprehensible stretches of history that have played out within these walls. We are but brief visitors in a place that has seen empires rise and fall, a place that has served as a silent witness to the changing tides of human belief. The cruciform churches remain, their stone hearts beating with the rhythm of an ancient devotion, standing as a testament to the power of faith to carve a world out of the darkness. And so, we continue our descent, leaving the echoes of the chapels behind as we move toward the even more mysterious levels below. The air grows thinner, and the sense of isolation deepens. We are moving beyond the reaches of recorded history and into the realm of pure mystery, where the stone becomes older and the purpose of the tunnels becomes even harder to discern. The faith of the Middle Ages may have occupied these halls, but as we go deeper, we must ask ourselves what older, stranger shadows might be lurking in the foundations of this mountain. The journey is far from over, and the deeper we go, the more we realize that the city of 10,000 people is not just a place of refuge, but a monument to the enduring mystery of the human spirit. To touch the walls of the uppermost chambers is to run your fingers across the grain of a time so distant it feels almost mythological. Beneath the layers of Byzantine crosses and the soot of medieval lamps, the rock begins to whisper a different language, one of bronze and chariots, and a forgotten empire that once commanded the heart of Anatolia. As we descend into the 7th level of our inquiry, we find ourselves standing before the Enigma of the Hittites. The prevailing narrative of Derinkuyu often begins with the early Christians, but the stratigraphy, the study of the successive layers of earth and stone, suggests a foundation that reaches much further back into the shadows of the Bronze Age. Many archaeologists now look toward the 15th century, before the Common Era as a potential birth date for the city's earliest excavations. This was an era of giants, a time when the Hittite Empire rose like a storm across the high plateaus, establishing a dominion that rivaled even the pharaohs of Egypt. And yet, for all their military might and their formidable iron-working skills, the Hittites were a people defined by a singular, persistent anxiety. They lived in a world of constant movement, where nomadic tribes and rival kingdoms ebbed and flowed across the landscape like the tides of a restless sea. It is within this atmosphere of ancient tension that the theory of the Hittite refuge takes hold. Imagine, if you will, a scout standing upon the sun-bleached ridges of Cappadocia, watching a cloud of dust rise on the horizon, the unmistakable sign of a Phrygian war party or a marauding band of Cascians. In such a moment, the vast open plains offered no sanctuary. The Hittites were masters of masonry above ground, but the soft volcanic tuff of the region offered a different kind of opportunity. It was a stone that invited the chisel, a landscape that begged to be hollowed out. Some researchers believe that the very first tunnels were carved not as permanent dwellings, but as tactical hideouts, a way for an entire community to vanish into the earth at a moment's notice, leaving the invaders to wander through a ghost landscape of empty fields and silent hills. The evidence for this Bronze Age origin is not merely speculative. It is written in the very tools left behind in the darkness. In the upper tiers of the city, tucked away in corners that have escaped the scouring of later centuries, archaeologists have recovered artifacts that predate the Roman era by a millennium. There are fragments of pottery with the distinct, heavy-firing techniques of the Hittite period, and more tellingly, bronze blades and stone scrapers that speak to a pre-iron technology. These are the discarded remnants of a people who were still learning the secrets of the mountain, using the tools of the 15th century before the Common Era to bite into the rock. As we trace the path of these early excavators, we see a design that prioritizes defense above all else. The narrowness of the passages, the sudden sharp turns that force a person to stoop and expose their neck, the ingenious placement of the rolling stone doors. These are the hallmarks of a culture that understood the geometry of fear. If the Hittites were indeed the original architects, they did not build for comfort, but for survival against a specific kind of threat. They were a people of the sun, worshippers of the storm god and the sun goddess of Erinna. Yet they found their ultimate salvation in the cold, silent womb of the earth. One cannot help but wonder about the transition of knowledge that must have occurred over those thousands of years. How did the secrets of the ventilation shafts and the hidden wells pass from the Hittite masters to the Phrygians and eventually to the Greeks and the Christians? Perhaps the city was never truly abandoned, but rather functioned as a permanent, subterranean heirloom, a gift of safety handed down through the ages. When we look at the sheer scale of the work, the idea that it was completed by a single generation, or even a single civilization, begins to dissolve. It is more likely a palimpsest, a parchment that has been erased and written over again and again. The Hittites may have carved the first few stanzas of this epic, setting the rhythm for everything that was to follow. The deeper we go, the more the air cools, and the more the weight of the mountain seems to press against the mind. We are moving past the era of written records and into a time where history is told only in the strike of a hammer against stone. If the 15th century, before the Common Era, marks the beginning of the city as a defensive fortress, what does that say about the world above? It suggests a landscape so volatile and dangerous that 10,000 people would choose the perpetual twilight of the deep over the beauty of the Anatolian sky. It suggests a civilization that had mastered the art of disappearance. As the years passed and the Hittite Empire eventually crumbled into the dust of the Iron Age, their subterranean legacy remained. The tunnels did not collapse. The air remained fresh. The water continued to flow through the secret cisterns. The city waited in the silence, a hollowed-out monument to a forgotten necessity. It is a humbling thought to realize that as we walk these corridors today, we are treading the same floorboards of earth that were trodden by people who saw the world before the fall of Troy, before the rise of Rome, and before the very concept of the modern world had even begun to flicker in the human imagination. The mystery of the Hittites is not just a question of who, but a question of why. Why this mountain? Why this depth? And as we prepare to move even further down, away from the light of the Bronze Age and into the truly ancient foundations, we must ask ourselves if even the Hittites were merely newcomers to a place that had already been waiting for them in the dark for a very, very long time. The shadows are growing longer now, and the stone is becoming even colder to the touch, as if the mountain itself is guarding a secret that even the great kings of Hattusa were never meant to know. The echoes of the Hittite chariots eventually fade into the dust of the Anatolian plateau, leaving behind a silence that is soon filled by the rhythmic clinking of iron against soft volcanic tuff. As we descend further into the 8th century before the Common Era, we encounter a new people who look upon these subterranean labyrinths not just as temporary refuges, but as a canvas for a grand architectural vision. These are the Phrygians, a culture of master stonemasons and weavers, perhaps best remembered through the legends of King Midas, whose supposed touch turned all to gold. But here, beneath the surface, their wealth was measured in the mastery of space and the silent expansion of a world without a sky. It is during this era, the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era, that Derinkuyu truly begins to breathe with a new, expansive life. The Phrygians were not content with the simple, utilitarian burrows of their predecessors. They possessed a sophisticated understanding of structural engineering, and as we run our hands along the walls of the mid-level galleries, we can feel the difference in the craftsmanship. The tool marks are more deliberate, the angles of the doorways are more precise, and the ceilings begin to arch with a grace that suggests an aesthetic intent rather than mere survival. They took the existing foundations and pushed them deeper, carving out massive communal spaces that could hold thousands of souls in a single, unified breath of cool, recycled air. When we compare the stonework of Derinkuyu to the famous Phrygian monuments found above ground, such as the magnificent Midas monument at Yazilikaya, a hauntingly familiar pattern emerges. The way the Phrygians treated stone was almost like wood. They carved deep, recessed niches and ornate facades into the living rock of the cliffs. Deep underground, this same spirit persists. We see the same stepped altars, the same carefully levelled floors, and the same peculiar circular ventilation shafts that mirror the geometry of their surface temples. It is as if they were trying to recreate the world they knew above in the safety of the dark, ensuring that even in the belly of the earth, the proportions of their civilization remained intact. As the years passed, the city became a living palimpsest, a manuscript where one culture's history is written directly over the fading ink of another. The transition of Derinkuyu through different cultural hands was not always a violent rupture, but often a slow, quiet inheritance. When the Phrygian kingdom eventually waned, the city did not fall into ruin. Instead, it waited. It waited for the Persians, then the Greeks, and eventually the early Christians, each group adding their own layers, their own modifications, and their own secrets to the stone. The stratigraphy, the study of these historical layers, becomes a dizzying puzzle for modern archaeologists. Because the city was carved out of solid rock rather than built up with bricks, there is no traditional rubble to date. We are left to look at the wear on the stairs and the soot on the ceilings, trying to discern where one century ends and another begins. This constant occupation creates a sense of deep time that is almost overwhelming. In the silence of the lower chambers, it is easy to lose the sense of which era you are standing in. Was this particular granary carved by a Phrygian farmer hiding from a Cimmerian raid, or was it expanded centuries later by a Byzantine monk? The stone does not tell us. It simply holds the shape of the need that created it. The Phrygians, however, seem to be the ones who gave the city its true scale, turning a series of disparate caves into a cohesive urban environment that could support 10,000 people in total isolation from the world above. Imagine the logistics of such an expansion. Thousands of tons of soft rock had to be carried out by hand, basket by basket, through narrow tunnels and up steep inclines. The Phrygian engineers would have had to calculate the weight of the mountain above them, ensuring that the pillars they left behind were strong enough to prevent a catastrophic collapse. And yet, there is no evidence of major structural failures. The city remains as stable today as it was nearly 3,000 years ago, a testament to a level of geological understanding that we are only just beginning to appreciate. They worked with the earth, not against it, following the natural veins of the tuff and respecting the pressure of the deep stone. As we move through these Phrygian-era halls, we notice the sophisticated air filtration systems. The main ventilation shafts descend over 55 meters, piercing through the levels like a great stone lung. Even at the lowest depths, the air remains fresh and constant, maintained at a steady 13 degrees Celsius, regardless of the blistering heat or freezing snows on the Anatolian plains above. It is a masterpiece of passive climate control, designed by a people who understood that to live in the dark, one must first master the wind. The Phrygians did not just survive here, they thrived, creating a subterranean society that functioned with the clockwork precision of a surface city. And so, the mystery of Derinkuyu deepens with every layer of history we peel back. If the Phrygians expanded it so significantly, what was the original catalyst that drove them to such extremes? Was it merely the threat of invasion, or was there something else? Something in the climate or the heavens that made the surface of the earth feel, suddenly, terrifyingly vulnerable? The transition of the city from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age shows a continuous, desperate refinement of these defences. The massive rolling stone doors, some weighing over 500 kilograms, were designed to be closed only from the inside, turning each level into an impenetrable fortress. The shadows of these ancient masons seemed to linger in the corners of the rooms, their presence felt in the smooth finish of a water trough or the placement of a lamp niche. They were a people of the sun who became a people of the stone, adapting their entire way of life to the rhythm of the underworld. As the Phrygian influence eventually gave way to the Hellenistic world, the city's purpose began to shift once more, but its foundations remained, solid, silent, and waiting for the next chapter of human history to seek shelter within its embrace. The weight of the ages is heavy here, and as we prepare to descend even further, we must wonder how much of what we see is the work of man, and how much is the work of a time so distant that even the Phrygians would have considered it ancient. The air in these deeper galleries changes, growing heavier with the scent of damp stone and the faint, metallic tang of minerals leaching through the volcanic tuff. As we move into the 7th and 8th centuries, the silence of the earth is met by the distant, muffled echoes of a world in turmoil above. The Arab-Byzantine wars have begun, and the surface of Cappadocia has become a high-stakes chessboard for two of the world's greatest empires. For the local Greek Christian populations, the threat of raiding parties is no longer a seasonal concern, but a constant reality of life, and so, The city of Derinkuyu undergoes its most profound transformation, evolving from a temporary refuge into a permanent subterranean metropolis, a golden age carved in the dark. It is during this period that the city reaches its peak capacity, housing perhaps 10,000 souls, though some estimates suggest even more could have huddled within these labyrinthine halls. This was not merely a place to hide, it was a place to live, to pray, and to endure. The transition is visible in the very texture of the walls, where the earlier Phrygian or Roman levels might have been utilitarian and rough. The Byzantine layers begin to show a sophisticated hand. The living quarters expand, growing more complex with the addition of multiple rooms, private sleeping alcoves, and communal areas that mimic the architecture of the surface. We see the emergence of grander spaces, stables for livestock, expansive cellars for the storage of grain and oil, and massive communal kitchens where the soot from ancient fires still clings to the arched ceilings like a shadow of a meal shared 1,200 years ago. The engineering required to sustain such a population in total isolation is staggering. The Byzantines perfected the ventilation shafts, some reaching as deep as 80 meters, ensuring that even in the lowest depths the air remained cool and breathable. They understood the fluid dynamics of the earth, carving out deep wells that tapped into the water table, providing a constant supply of fresh water that could not be poisoned or cut off by an invading army. As the years passed, the inhabitants realized that they were not just surviving, they were thriving in a hidden world of their own making. The city became a mirror of the society above, a quiet, stone reflection of Byzantine life, shielded by meters of solid rock from the chaos of the sunlit world. As we walk through these halls, we begin to notice decorative elements that speak to a desire for beauty, even in the absence of light. Small, arched niches are carved into the walls to hold oil lamps, their edges smoothed by the touch of countless hands. In the chapels, the stone is worked with greater care, featuring cruciform floor plans and vaulted ceilings that echo the grand cathedrals of Constantinople. There is a profound sense of devotion here, a feeling that these people were not just hiding from an enemy, but were drawing closer to something eternal. The stratigraphy, that layer-by-layer record of human occupation, shows a continuous presence that lasted for centuries. Radiocarbon dating of organic remains found in the soot and refuse confirms that this was a living, breathing community during the height of the Byzantine era. The mystery, however, remains in the sheer scale of the labor. To remove millions of tons of soft volcanic rock without the aid of modern machinery is a feat that defies easy explanation. Every basket of stone had to be carried up through narrow vertical shafts or dragged along sloping corridors. The sheer persistence required to expand the city level by level, century by century, suggests a culture with a deep ancestral connection to the underground. Perhaps they were not just following a blueprint, but were listening to the stone itself, following the natural fissures and soft spots in the tuff to create a home that felt as organic as a cave, yet as structured as a palace. In these deeper levels, the temperature remains a constant 13 degrees Celsius, regardless of the scorching heat or freezing snows on the Anatolian plateau above. It is a world without seasons, a world of perpetual twilight where time is measured not by the movement of the sun, but by the flickering of a wick and the slow drip of water from a stalactite. The Byzantine inhabitants would have spent weeks, perhaps months at a time, within these walls during periods of intense conflict. One can only imagine the psychological weight of such an existence. The muffled sounds of footsteps overhead, the low murmur of prayers in the dark, and the absolute, crushing silence that follows when the lamps are extinguished for the night. And yet, there is a strange comfort in this deep time. The city of Derinkuyu stands as a testament to human resilience, a reminder that when the world above becomes too dangerous, we have the capacity to build an entirely new one beneath our feet. The Byzantines did not just occupy these tunnels, they sanctified them, turning a hole in the ground into a fortress of the spirit. As we prepare to descend even further, into the levels that predate even these sophisticated builders, we must ask ourselves what original impulse drove the very first architects to strike the rock, and what they might have found waiting for them in the dark, long before the first cross was ever carved into the stone. The deeper we go, the further we travel back into a history that is as much about the earth as it is about the people who once called it home. If you were to search through the vast libraries of the ancient world, scanning the brittle papyrus of the Greeks or the meticulous ledgers of the Roman administrators, you would find a curious and unsettling silence. Despite the staggering scale of this subterranean world, despite the hundreds of thousands of tons of volcanic tuff that had to be hauled to the surface, there is not a single contemporary written record that describes its creation. It is as if a city of 10,000 people simply materialized within the earth, leaving behind no architect's plans, no royal decrees, and no chronicles of the labor that must have spanned generations. This absence of evidence is a mystery in its own right. In an era where kings were prone to carving their triumphs into every available cliffside, the silence surrounding this massive feat of engineering feels almost deliberate. A secret kept so well that even the ink of history failed to capture it. We are left to wonder how a project of this magnitude, one that rivals the Great Pyramids in terms of sheer volume and complexity, could be omitted from the historical texts of the civilizations that claimed this land. As the centuries drifted by, the ink on the maps of the surface world changed from Hittite to Phrygian, from Persian to Roman, yet the story of the tunnels remained unwritten. This lack of documentation forces us to rely on the fragile, shimmering threads of oral tradition, the stories passed down from mother to daughter and father to son by the flickering light of a hearth. In the local folklore of the region, the tunnels are often spoken of not as a construction, but as a discovery. The elders tell of a time when their ancestors found the openings already there, waiting in the silence of the hills, like a gift from a forgotten age. They speak of the old ones, a shadowy precursor race who understood the language of the stone, and who fled into the cool dark of the earth during a time of great fire and wind. These legends, while beautiful and haunting, offer little in the way of concrete dates or names. They are memories that have been softened by time, like a pebble worn smooth by the flow of a river. Without written records, we are forced to look at the physical evidence left behind, the stratigraphy, which is the study of the layers of earth and rock that build up over time. By examining the way the soil has settled and the microscopic traces of organic matter trapped in the stone, archaeologists try to piece together a timeline, but even this is difficult. Radiocarbon dating, the process of measuring the decay of carbon isotopes to determine the age of an object, requires organic material like wood or bone in the clean-swept corridors of the city. Such materials are rare. The stone itself does not speak of its age, and the air within the tunnels has been filtered by the earth for so long that it carries no scent of the era in which it was first disturbed. And so, we find ourselves in a landscape of shadows, where the history of the world above and the reality of the world below do not always align. Why would a civilization capable of such incredible precision choose to remain anonymous? Perhaps the construction was so secret, so vital to the survival of the people, that to write of it was to risk its discovery by enemies. Or perhaps the people who built the deepest levels did not use writing as we understand it. They may have been a culture that existed in the long shadow of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt and catastrophic climate change that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. During this time, the world was plunged back into glacial conditions, and it is theorized by some that humanity was forced to retreat into the earth to escape the freezing winds and the celestial fire that rained from the sky. If these tunnels date back to such a distant epoch, It would explain why no written records exist. Writing, as we define it, did not emerge in the archaeological record until much later. We are looking at a chapter of human history that was written in stone rather than ink, a monumental effort that predates the very concept of a library. The silence of the records is not a void, but a testament to the depth of time we are dealing with. It suggests a world where knowledge was held in the mind and the hand, where the layout of the city was a map carried in the collective memory of the tribe, passed down through the generations until the original architects were forgotten, and only the stone remained. As we wander through these echoing halls, the weight of this missing history begins to feel as heavy as the rock overhead. We look for a sign, a mason's mark, a date, a name. But the walls remain smooth and indifferent. The reliance on folklore to fill these gaps creates a bridge between the scientific and the mythical. In the absence of a written chronicle, the stories of the local people become our only guide. They tell of hidden doors that only open at certain phases of the moon, and of deep shafts that lead to an even older world beneath this one. While a modern historian might dismiss these as mere superstitions, in the context of a city that shouldn't exist, every myth feels like a potential clue. The mystery of the missing records reminds us of the limits of our own understanding. We are accustomed to a world where everything is documented, where every achievement is tweeted, filmed, and archived. But here, in the cool, still air of the underground, we are reminded that for the vast majority of human existence, our stories were told in the dark, and our greatest works were left for the earth to keep. The builders of this city did not seek fame or the recognition of future generations. They sought safety, they sought community, and they sought a way to live in harmony with the stone. As the years passed, the memory of who first struck the rock faded into the mists of prehistory. The later inhabitants, the Christians and the Phrygians, simply moved into the spaces that were already there, expanding them, carving their own symbols over the older, fainter marks of those who came before. This layering of cultures makes it even harder to see the original structure. It is like a palimpsest, a parchment that has been scraped clean and written over many times, until the original text is nothing more than a ghost beneath the surface. We can see the shape of the letters, but we cannot quite read the words. The deeper we descend, the more we realize that the lack of written history is part of the city's power. It forces us to engage with the space emotionally and physically, rather than intellectually. We cannot hide behind dates and names. We must simply be present in the dark, feeling the texture of the walls, listening to the way the sound of our own breathing changes as the ceiling lowers and the walls close in. The city is a monument to the unrecorded, a cathedral of the anonymous. It stands as a reminder that there are still places in this world that refuse to be fully known, secrets that the earth has held for 10,000 years and has no intention of giving up. And so, we continue our journey into the silence, moving past the empty granaries and the dry wells, looking for the one detail that might have been overlooked. Somewhere in the darkness, there may be a single carving, a single discarded tool, or a single hearth fire stain that could tell us when this all began. But for now, we must be content with the mystery. We must accept that some parts of the human story are meant to remain in the shadows, whispered in the folklore of the hills, but never captured by the pen. As we move toward the lower levels, where the air grows colder and the silence grows deeper, we begin to understand that the missing records are not a failure of history, but a reflection of the city's true nature, a place built to endure long after the names of its creators have turned to dust. Beneath the soft, undulating waves of the Cappadocian landscape, a different kind of geography begins to reveal itself, one that defies the simple logic of a single, isolated refuge. For decades, it was believed that Derinkuyu stood alone, a vertical marvel carved into the volcanic tuff. But as researchers began to map the surrounding darkness, they stumbled upon a discovery that expanded the scale of this ancient world beyond anything previously imagined. A single narrow artery of stone, a tunnel stretching nearly 5 miles through the earth, was found connecting the depths of Derinkuyu to the neighboring city of Kaimakli. To walk this corridor in the mind's eye is to confront the sheer ambition of a people who did not merely wish to hide, but to thrive in a subterranean kingdom. This was not a crude burrow or a temporary crawl space. It was a feat of engineering that required a precise understanding of the soft, ash-based rock. The tunnel is large enough for a person to pass through, yet narrow enough to be easily defended. A lifeline of stone that turned 2 separate cities into a unified network of survival. It suggests a level of social organization and long-term planning that challenges our understanding of the early inhabitants. They were not just digging for their lives. They were constructing a hidden map of the world beneath our feet. One cannot help but wonder how many more of these invisible threads remain hidden beneath the dust and the vineyards. If Derinkuyu and Kaimakli are linked, it is highly probable that the hundreds of other smaller settlements scattered across the region are also part of this vast, interconnected web. We begin to see Cappadocia not as a collection of individual sites, but as a singular, sprawling metropolis that exists entirely in the negative space of the earth. It is a haunting thought that while civilizations rose and fell on the surface, while armies marched and empires crumbled in the light of the sun, an entire civilization may have been moving silently through miles of lightless corridors, passing one another in the deep quiet of the stone. The logistical reality of maintaining such a network is staggering to contemplate. Imagine the absolute darkness of a 5-mile tunnel, buried hundreds of feet below the surface. There are no natural landmarks here, no stars to guide the way, no shifts in the wind to signal a change in direction. To navigate these passages required a mastery of the senses that we have long since lost. The inhabitants would have relied on the steady flicker of oil lamps, the scent of burning linseed, and the resonance of their own footsteps against the floor. Every inch of these 5 miles had to be hand-carved, every basket of excavated stone carried back to the surface, every breath of air carefully managed through the sophisticated ventilation shafts that drop like needles through the crust of the earth. As we consider the sheer volume of work involved, the question of why becomes even more pressing. A 5-mile tunnel is not a project born of a sudden panic. It is the work of generations. It suggests a period of history where the surface was so consistently dangerous that the investment of decades of labor into a subterranean highway was considered a rational necessity. This brings us back to the concept of deep time and the gaps in our stratigraphic records. In archaeology, stratigraphy is the study of rock layers and how they accumulate over time, a way of reading the earth like the pages of a book. But here, the book has been hollowed out. The very act of carving these tunnels destroyed the geological evidence that might have told us exactly when they were made. We are left to speculate on the daily life of those who traversed these lightless miles. Was the tunnel a busy thoroughfare, filled with the sounds of trade and the hushed voices of families moving between cities? Or was it a silent, sacred path, used only in times of the greatest peril? The air in these deep passages remains at a constant cool temperature, regardless of the blistering heat or freezing snows above. It is a world of eternal autumn, where time seems to stretch and thin. The silence is not empty, It is heavy with the weight of the millions of tons of rock overhead. To spend hours walking through such a space is to experience a profound detachment from the rhythms of the natural world. There is a psychological endurance required for such a life that is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. The maintenance of the tunnels alone would have been a constant struggle against the slow, steady pressure of the earth. Even the strongest stone can shift, and the soft tuff of Cappadocia is prone to erosion if moisture is allowed to seep in. These corridors had to be monitored, reinforced, and kept clear of debris. In the pitch blackness, a single collapse could mean the difference between a thriving connection and a tomb. The people of the underground were not just builders. They were keepers of the dark, guardians of a fragile equilibrium between the safety of the stone and the crushing power of the mountain. As we look further afield, beyond the known link to Kaimakli, the mystery deepens. Local legends speak of tunnels that stretch even further, reaching toward the distant peaks of Mount Erciyes, or connecting to hidden chambers that have not seen a human footprint in 1,000 years. Modern ground-penetrating radar has hinted at anomalies, hollow spaces and linear patterns deep underground that do not align with any known maps. It is as if we are looking at a giant puzzle with most of the pieces still buried. We are only seeing the entrances, the small glimpses of a system that might span the entire province. And so we must ask ourselves, what does it mean for a culture to choose the depths over the heights? Most civilizations express their greatness through monuments that reach for the sky, pyramids, cathedrals, skyscrapers. But the architects of the underground chose the opposite path. Their legacy is one of subtraction rather than addition. They carved their history into the absence of light. Every mile of tunnel is a testament to a collective will that valued invisibility over vanity. As the years passed, and the reasons for their retreat into the earth perhaps faded into memory, the tunnels remained, a silent infrastructure waiting to be rediscovered by a world that had forgotten they were ever there. The 5-mile link between Derinkuyu and Kaimakli serves as a bridge, not just between two cities, but between our reality and a forgotten era of human existence. It forces us to confront the limits of our own perception. We walk upon the grass and the soil, thinking we understand the ground we stand on, while beneath us there may be miles of corridors, staircases, and halls, all carved by hands that shared our own DNA, but viewed the world through a lens of profound necessity that we can barely imagine. The darkness of the tunnels is not a void, it is a reservoir of secrets, a place where the echoes of the past are preserved in the very shape of the silence. In the stillness of these deep passages, the air feels different, thicker with the dust of ages. It carries the faint, ghostly impression of everyone who ever brushed against these walls. As we move deeper into the network, leaving the known paths behind, we begin to sense that the true scale of this underground world is yet to be revealed. The 5-mile tunnel is likely just one thread in a vast tapestry, a single line in a story that is still being written by the shadows. The more we find, the more we realize how much remains lost, hidden in the deep folds of time, waiting for a flicker of light to bring it back to the world of the living. The silence of the deep earth is not as empty as it seems, for beneath the heavy stillness of the stone, a new kind of vision is beginning to peer through the darkness. In recent years, the flickering torchlight of the past has been replaced by the invisible pulse of ground-penetrating radar, a technology that sends silent waves of energy down into the solid rock, listening for the echoes of what lies beneath. These pulses do not see with light, but with rhythm, mapping the density of the earth and revealing the ghosts of chambers that no human eye has seen for thousands of years. As the researchers move slowly across the surface, their instruments begin to hum with the discovery of voids, vast, hollow spaces that suggest the city we know is merely the entrance to a much larger, more labyrinthine world. We find ourselves looking at digital maps that resemble a nervous system, a complex web of arteries and veins carved into the very bones of the planet, stretching further and deeper than any mapmaker had previously dared to imagine. It is here, in these unmapped depths, that the questions begin to weigh as heavily as the ceiling above. Geological analysis of the surrounding terrain reveals a fascinating paradox. The rock itself is a soft volcanic tuff, formed from the ash of ancient eruptions that cooled long before the first breath of civilization. This stone is remarkably easy to carve, yielding to the simplest of tools, yet it possesses a strange and enduring stability that has allowed these vaulted ceilings to hold their shape across the vast expanse of millennia. Geologists study the mineral composition, looking for signs of stress or the slow creep of the earth. But they find a structure that seems almost defiant of time. The stability of the volcanic rock suggests that those who designed this city possessed an intimate, perhaps even intuitive understanding of the Earth's internal pressures. They knew exactly how much stone to leave behind to support the weight of the world above. A feat of engineering that seems to transcend the primitive tools we assume they used. And yet, as we gain a clearer picture of the city's physical form, its origins become even more obscured by the fog of deep time. A quiet but fervent debate has taken root among the archaeologists who walk these silent halls. A disagreement centered on the true age of these excavations. Traditional chronologies often place the construction within the last few thousand years, attributing the work to known cultures seeking refuge from the storms of war or the heat of the sun. But there are those who look at the sheer scale of the labor, the millions of tons of rock removed by hand, and begin to wonder if the timeline we have been taught is far too short. They speak of stratigraphy, the study of the layers of earth and debris that accumulate over time, and how these layers often tell a conflicting story. In the deepest reaches of the city, the sediment seems to whisper of an era far older than the Bronze or the Iron Ages, a time that perhaps stretches back to the end of the last great ice age. This period, often referred to as the Younger Dryas, a sudden and mysterious cooling of the planet that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago, looms large in the minds of those searching for the city's true architects. It was a time of cataclysmic shifts, a world of rising seas and vanishing landscapes. And it is whispered that perhaps this underground sanctuary was not built as a temporary hideout, but as a permanent ark for a civilization facing an environmental collapse. If the city dates back to this distant epoch, it would mean that a highly organized society existed long before the dawn of recorded history. A people who understood the necessity of retreating into the womb of the earth to survive the fury of the skies. The evidence remains elusive, hidden behind the very permanence of the stone. Unlike wood or bone, carved rock does not easily give up its secrets to radiocarbon dating, a method that measures the decay of carbon atoms to determine the age of organic materials. Because the city is made of inorganic stone, we are left to search for the smallest traces of human presence. A discarded tool, a fragment of charcoal from an ancient hearth, or the faint staining of soot on a ceiling. But these clues are often misleading, for a cave carved 10,000 years ago can be inhabited by 100 different cultures throughout its life, each one leaving their own layer of history over the original work. The current occupants of a house tell us nothing of the man who laid the foundation, and so the city remains a palimpsest, a parchment that has been erased and written over again and again until the original message is nearly impossible to discern. As we linger in these chambers, the sheer weight of the forgotten ages begins to settle upon us. We realize that our modern understanding of progress may be a narrow corridor, one that overlooks the vast circular nature of time. The geological stability of the volcanic tuff has preserved a moment that should have been lost, a monument to a collective effort that defies our standard definitions of primitive man. Scientists continue to debate whether the city was carved in a single massive burst of inspiration or if it grew slowly, like a coral reef, over the course of centuries. Each theory has its merits, and each theory has its gaps, leaving us in a state of perpetual wonder. The ground-penetrating radar continues its silent work, tracing the outlines of staircases that lead to nowhere and doorways that remain blocked by the debris of eons. There is a certain humility in this pursuit, an acknowledgement that despite our satellites and our sensors, we are still just children poking at the edges of a great mystery. The more we map, the more we realize that the city is not just a place, but a question, a challenge to our understanding of human capability and the depths of our own past. We are looking into a mirror of stone, trying to recognize the faces of those who once walked these halls, wondering if they were so different from us, or if they were merely a different version of the same story. As the geological surveys continue to confirm the ancient resilience of these walls, the debate over the city's age only grows more quiet and contemplative. It is a mystery that does not demand an immediate answer, but rather invites us to sit in the stillness and listen. The rock does not hurry. It has seen the rise and fall of empires, the shifting of poles, and the slow dance of the stars, and it remains patient and unyielding. We move through the shadows of the 12th level, feeling the cool air that has circulated through these vents for longer than our languages have existed, and we begin to accept that some secrets are meant to be kept by the earth, guarded by the weight of the mountain and the endless velvet dark. The story of this place is still being written, not with ink, but with the slow, methodical uncovering of the truth, one heartbeat of the radar at a time, as we move ever closer to the heart of a civilization that time forgot, but the stone remembered. The sound of a heavy stone door rolling into its groove is a sound that echoes across thousands of years, a final, grinding note that signals the end of an era. We often think of these subterranean worlds as relics of a prehistoric past, frozen in the amber of the Neolithic or the Bronze Age, but the stone does not discriminate between the ancient and the modern. For the Cappadocian Greeks, these tunnels were not archaeological curiosities, they were a living sanctuary, a functional inheritance passed down through generations, like a family secret whispered in the dark, as late as the early 20th century. While the rest of the world was experimenting with electricity and flight, families here were still descending into the cool, protective embrace of the earth, lighting oil lamps in chambers that had seen the same flickers of light during the time of the Hittites. It is a strange thought to consider that while the Great War raged across the surface of Europe, people were still using these ancient ventilation shafts to breathe, still storing their grain in jars tucked into niches carved by hands that had been dust for 3 millennia. The Greeks of this region, the Karamanlides, lived a dual existence. They walked the sun-drenched hills by day, tending to their vineyards and their livestock, but they kept the keys to the underworld close to their chests. When danger approached, as it so often did in the volatile landscape of the fading Ottoman Empire, they did not flee to the mountains, they fled into them. They moved with a practiced silence, dragging the massive circular millstones across the corridors, effectively vanishing from the face of the earth in a matter of hours. To an outside observer, the village would appear abandoned, a ghost town of stone huts and empty streets, while just 40 feet below, a community of thousands sat in the velvet silence, waiting for the world above to become safe once more. But the safety of the stone has its limits, and there are forces that even a mountain cannot withstand. In the year 1923, the geopolitics of the surface finally reached down into the depths. The convention concerning the exchange of Greek and Turkish populations was signed, a sweeping mandate that sought to untangle the ethnic tapestries of two emerging nations. It was a cold, bureaucratic decision that ignored the deep roots of the people who lived there. The Cappadocian Greeks, who had called these valleys home for longer than history could accurately record, were told they had to leave. They were to be moved to a motherland many of them had never seen, leaving behind the only world they had ever known. Imagine the final days in the tunnels, the packing of small lanterns, the hushed prayers in the rock-cut chapels, the way the lamplight must have caught the soot-stained ceilings one last time. They did not leave because the air ran out, or because the water failed, or because an enemy breached the stone doors. They left because a piece of paper in a distant city said they no longer belonged to the land. As the last families emerged into the harsh sunlight of 1924, they left the doors unsealed, the chambers empty, and the silence began to settle. It was a silence unlike any the city had known before. In the past, abandonments were temporary, brief interludes of quiet before the next wave of inhabitants arrived to clear the dust. But this time, the silence lasted. It stretched from years into decades. As the decades passed, the memory of the city began to thin, like a mist burning off in the morning sun. The surface villages grew and changed, and the children who played near the hidden entrances forgot what lay beneath their feet. The vents became clogged with autumn leaves and drifting soil. The stone doors became stuck in their tracks, and the darkness inside grew heavy and thick. The city became a myth, a story told by elders that the younger generations dismissed as folklore. It is a testament to the sheer scale of the earth that a space capable of housing 10,000 people could simply disappear, hidden in plain sight beneath the basements of ordinary homes. For 40 years, the city breathed in slow, shallow gulps of air, a sleeping giant waiting for a single accidental stroke of a hammer to wake it from its long, dusty slumber. The year 1963 arrived with no fanfare, just another year in the quiet province of Nevşehir. A local man, seeking to expand his home, struck a wall in his basement. He expected to find solid rock, the stubborn volcanic tuff that forms the foundation of the region. Instead, the stone gave way to a void. He peered through the jagged hole and saw not a cave, but a room, and beyond that room, a corridor that spiraled down into a darkness that seemed to have no end. He had not just found a hidden cellar. He had punctured the veil of time itself. He had rediscovered Derinkuyu, and in doing so, he invited the light of the modern world back into a labyrinth that had been holding its breath for 40 years, waiting to tell a story that we are only just beginning to understand. The air changes the moment you step beyond the threshold of the upper world. It grows heavy with the scent of cool, damp basalt and the peculiar, metallic tang of earth that has not felt the sun in 1,000 years. As you descend, the sounds of modern Turkey begin to fray and dissolve. The distant hum of an engine or the call of a bird becomes a ghost of a memory, replaced by a silence so profound it feels like a physical weight against the eardrums. It is a stillness that does not merely signify the absence of noise, but the presence of an immense, brooding antiquity. Walking through these corridors today is an exercise in sensory deprivation and heightened awareness. The walls are not smooth like the concrete of our world. They are textured with the rhythmic, scalloped marks of hand tools, the signature of thousands of nameless workers who labored by the flickering light of linseed oil lamps,
Your fingers trace these grooves, and for a fleeting second, the gap of 3,000 years narrows until it is paper-thin. You are touching the same stone they touched, feeling the same chill that seeped into their bones as they carved a sanctuary out of the very foundation of the world. The light from a flashlight behaves differently here. It does not scatter as it does in the open air, but seems to be swallowed by the porous volcanic tuff. The shadows are long and elastic, stretching down narrow staircases that drop vertically into the deep dark. And yet, despite the enclosure, there is no sense of stagnation. The ancient engineers understood the invisible rivers of the air, carving ventilation shafts that reach up like chimneys to the surface, hundreds of feet above, even 18 levels down. A faint ghostly breeze might brush against your cheek, a reminder that the city is still breathing, even if its lungs are made of stone. As you move deeper, the acoustic properties of the chambers begin to reveal themselves in unsettling ways. The softest whisper does not simply vanish, it travels. The curved ceilings and circular doorways act as a natural amplifier, carrying the sound of a footfall or a muffled word around corners and through floor levels. In the great communal halls, where thousands once gathered to eat or pray, the resonance is deep and cathedral-like. If you stand perfectly still, you can imagine the low murmur of a city in hiding, the clatter of ceramic pots, the soft lowing of livestock kept in the upper stables, and the rhythmic chanting of priests in the hidden chapels. The stone remembers the vibrations of humanity, holding on to the echoes of a civilization that chose to vanish beneath the grass. This acoustic clarity was likely a survival mechanism. In a world of shadows, hearing was as vital as sight. A sentry stationed near a rolling stone door could hear the approach of an enemy from great distances, the sound of iron sandals on rock telegraphing danger through the labyrinth long before a torch appeared in the gloom. It is a haunting thought that these tunnels were designed to be a giant ear, pressed forever against the chest of the earth, listening for the footsteps of those who meant them harm. But as the echoes fade, the questions only grow louder. Who were the first ones to strike the rock, and what were they so afraid of that they committed generations of their lives to this subterranean existence? We speak of the Phrygians in the 8th century before the Common Era, or the Hittites even earlier, but the stone itself offers no dates. It does not speak in the language of radiocarbon, the method of measuring the decay of carbon atoms to find an age, because the volcanic rock contains no organic matter to test. We are left to guess based on the fragments of pottery or the style of a cross carved into a wall, but these are merely the footprints of the people who came later, the squatters in a house they did not build. There is a profound mystery in the sheer scale of the disappearance. 10,000 people, perhaps as many as 20,000, lived, worked, and died here. They raised children in the cool dark. They pressed grapes into wine in stone vats. They ground grain and stored it in silos that could feed an army. And then they were gone.
The city was not destroyed by fire or siege. It was simply vacated, left to the dust and the spiders and the slow, patient drip of groundwater. It is as if an entire culture stepped into the rock and never came back out, leaving behind a blueprint of a society that valued collective survival over individual vanity. As you climb back toward the surface, the transition is jarring. The warmth of the sun feels aggressive, the colors of the sky and the trees almost too vibrant to bear. You look back at the small, unassuming hole in the ground and realize that the world we see is only a thin crust. Beneath our feet lie the bones of a different way of being, a silent, sprawling testament to human resilience and the lengths to which we will go to preserve our light in the face of an encroaching darkness. The city of Derinkuyu remains, a riddle carved in basalt, waiting for a time when we are quiet enough to finally hear what the stone is trying to say. The weight of the earth is a silent, constant companion to those who walk the dusty plains of Anatolia, yet few truly grasp the scale of the void that exists just inches beneath their boots. It is a strange thing to consider, that while empires rose and fell in the harsh sunlight above, while the winds of the plateau carved patterns into the volcanic tuff, and the seasons turned from bitter frost to searing heat, a mirror world existed in the cold, unblinking dark. Derinkuyu is more than a feat of engineering. It is a physical manifestation of the human instinct to endure, a subterranean cathedral dedicated to the simple, profound act of staying alive. As we stand at the threshold of this final reflection, we must acknowledge that the stone does not give up its secrets easily. The very nature of a city carved into living rock means that the traditional tools of the historian often come up empty. We speak of stratigraphy, the study of soil layers that usually tells us which civilization came first. But here there is no soil to sift through. There are only tool marks, smoothed by centuries of passing shoulders, and the faint lingering scent of ancient wood smoke that seems to have permeated the very pores of the basalt. We look for organic material to perform radiocarbon dating, searching for a stray piece of charcoal or a discarded bone that might tell us if these halls were carved during the Iron Age or perhaps even earlier, during the mysterious era of the Younger Dryas, that 1,000-year cold snap that gripped the world nearly 13,000 years ago. But the inhabitants were meticulous. They swept their floors, they cleared their vents, and they left behind a vacuum that science struggles to fill. And so we are left with the mystery of the hands that held the chisels. We imagine the rhythmic thud of copper and stone ringing out through the tunnels, a sound that would have been the heartbeat of this hidden world. It is easy to feel a sense of vertigo when considering the sheer volume of material removed from the earth. Thousands upon thousands of tons of rock were carried out, basket by basket, through narrow shafts and winding stairs. Where did it all go? Perhaps it was spread across the fields, disguised as natural outcrops, or used to build the very surface villages that served as the first line of defense. There is a quiet brilliance in this invisibility. The greatest strength of Derinkuyu was not its massive circular doors or its deep wells, but the fact that, to a passing army, it simply did not exist. The air within the lower levels remains cool and remarkably fresh, a testament to the sophisticated ventilation shafts that reach toward the sky like the lungs of a sleeping giant. As one descends deeper, past the 8th level and into the unexplored reaches that likely stretch even further, the silence becomes heavy. It is a restorative kind of silence, the kind that exists only in the deep places of the world where the frantic pace of modern life cannot reach. Here, time loses its linear grip. The hours spent in the flickering light of an oil lamp would have felt different than the hours spent under the sun. In the dark, one listens to the earth itself. The subtle shifting of the tectonic plates, the slow percolation of groundwater through the stone, the muffled echo of one's own breath. We must wonder what life was like for the children born in these shadows, those who grew up knowing the texture of the wall better than the colors of a sunset. To them, the world was a series of interconnected chambers, a labyrinth of safety where the community was knit together by necessity and shared breath. There is a profound beauty in that level of cooperation. To maintain a city of 10,000 people in total isolation requires a social harmony that we, in our fractured modern age, can barely conceive of. Every person had a role. Every scrap of food was accounted for. Every drop of water was a precious gift from the deep aquifers. It was a civilization defined not by what it built upward toward the heavens, but by how deeply it could root itself into the heart of the world. As the years passed and the threats from the surface eventually faded into legend, the city began to breathe more slowly. The great stone doors were rolled back, and the people emerged into the blinding light of the Anatolian sun, perhaps carrying with them a permanent shadow in their eyes. But the city remained. It waited through the Byzantine era, through the coming of the Seljuks and the Ottomans, sitting patiently beneath the feet of farmers who had no idea that a masterpiece of ancient architecture lay just beneath their ploughs. It is humbling to think of how many other Derinkuyus might still be out there, hidden beneath the sands of Egypt, the jungles of the Yucatan, or the rolling hills of Europe. We are a species that forgets as much as we remember, and the earth is a vast library with most of its volumes buried in the basement. The mystery of Derinkuyu is not just a question of who or when, but a question of why. We are so often drawn back to the earth. There is a primal comfort in the stone, a sense of permanence that our wooden houses and steel skyscrapers can never replicate. When we walk these tunnels, we are walking through the collective memory of our ancestors, feeling their fears, their hopes, and their incredible ingenuity. The city is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when the world above is filled with chaos and uncertainty, there is always a way to carve out a space for peace. We are a resilient flame, capable of burning even in the oxygen-thin depths of a mountain. As we prepare to leave the tunnels and return to the surface, let us carry that stillness with us. The world above is loud and fast, filled with the constant chatter of the present moment, but beneath it all, the stone remains. The basalt of Cappadocia holds its breath, guarding the secrets of the 10,000 who once called the darkness home. Perhaps, in the quiet moments before sleep, we can find our own Derinkuyu, a place of inner depth and unshakable calm, where the weight of history is not a burden, but a foundation. The shadows lengthen across the valley of Gorome now, and the fairy chimneys cast long, thin fingers across the sand. The entrance to the underground city is once again just a hole in the ground, a modest opening that reveals nothing of the wonders within. But we know better now. We know that the crust of the earth is thin, and that the story of humanity is written in layers, many of which we have yet to turn. For now the city sleeps. The ventilation shafts draw in the cool night air. The deep wells reflect the stars that the inhabitants could not see, and the silence of the ages settles once more over the basalt halls. There is a certain peace in knowing that not everything has been explained. In a world where every corner is mapped by satellites and every historical fact is debated in the light of day, Derinkuyu remains a sovereign territory of mystery. It belongs to the past, to the earth, and to the quiet reaches of our own imagination. As the light fades and the weight of the day lifts, we can rest in the knowledge that some secrets are meant to remain buried, waiting for a time when the world is ready to listen to the stone once more. The journey through the deep reaches of Anatolia has come to its end, but the echoes of those ancient chisels will continue to ring out in the quiet spaces of the mind, a steady, rhythmic reminder of the strength we find when we go deep, and the enduring light that survives even in the heart of the mountain.